Be warned, this video contains spoilers for anybody who intends to play drowning. As mental illness slowly becomes less stigmatized, we're seeing more people being open about their own experiences with mental illnesses. Among them, depression gets a lot of attention, and depending on where you go on the internet, it can seem like almost everybody has depression. I'm looking at you, Reddit. Despite how frequent depression may show up in our vocabulary or on topics or in popular media, many people may not understand what depression actually is. I'm Solomon Rambling, and today, with Polygonal Wolf's Drowning, I hope to give a deeper look into depression to keep people informed and help people understand if something they have is something they should go get checked. For those of you who are just joining this video series, I have designed this series to help look at video games that talk about mental health and provide some information on mental illness in general based on what I know. I may give a few critiques on the game as we move forward, but I've already written a review on Drowning, so if you want to look at that, go ahead and hit the link in the description. To begin, let's give a general overview of Drowning. With this game, you will follow an adolescent over 4 years of his life as his depression slowly gets worse. We see how he interacts with depression and the world around him, and also see how his life becomes more and more miserable as we walk through these kind of environmental settings. As the game progresses, these environmental settings grow a little more sinister, matching the experience and tone that we see with our main character. Before we look at how our character experiences depression and drowning, we first must understand the difference between sadness, a depressed mood, and clinical depression. It may sound a little strange to define things like sad since we've grown up with it all our lives. However, if we don't define something like this, we risk not understanding what is truly the difference between a normal emotion and something that requires medical or a treatment intervention. To give an example of what that would look like, if doctors said that you can't handle minor cuts, that you have to go see them, then suddenly every time you cut yourself, you would be rushing to the doctor to get it fixed. Instead, we're told that we can handle minor ouches and boo-boos, and we don't need someone else to help us with that. The same thing goes with sadness. It's ironic that if you look up sad on Google, the first thing that shows you on the sidebar is seasonal affective disorder, a type of depression. Now, sadness is perfectly normal. To define it, it's simply being unhappy. Many of you have felt sad for a variety of reasons, whether you've lost a job, you lost a video game, you've had a bad day, you didn't get something you wanted, someone died. Sadness is normal, and we want to treat it as normal because that's part of everyone's lives. They say you have to be sad in order to know what it's like to be happy. But that's not as important as recognizing that your emotions will change. You can't always be happy. There will inevitably be some point in your life when you feel sad, and you may even feel sad for a long period of time. The key thing about sadness is it eventually goes away, and being unhappy doesn't necessarily mean it'll impact every part of your life. Now we move on to depressed mood. Now, a depressed mood is part of what is needed to get a diagnosis of depression. But a depressed mood essentially is a lowered mood that is usually accompanied by not wanting to do much, that you isolate, that you have no motivation. And sometimes with people, they can't have a depressed mood. Maybe the sadness is so bad it dips into that kind of harsher emotion. Other times you can see things like grief, which really hits a person hard. When we hear of someone who has lost a loved one, we often think that, they'll take work off the next week or so. And that's not unusual. It's a terrible experience to lose someone you love. And at the same time, that's a natural part of life. We all die at some point. So even if grief is this awful, awful, awful thing, we can handle it with help from others in our lives. Maybe we need a therapist during that time, but we also have friends and family members who help us get past that stage in our life. So again, you can feel a depressed mood at times, and even that can be natural. If you feel like you can't handle it though, that's where you do need to get help. I want to emphasize that feeling sad, feeling grief, feeling a depressed mood, all can feel awful. And if it gets to the point where you're thinking suicidal thoughts, then you do need to get help. There have been many instances where a person had some bad experience in their life. They had access to a dangerous material, such as a gun, and they killed themselves on the spot when if they had waited maybe 10 minutes, 30 minutes, they could have calmed down. So again, this is not to say sad, depressed mood, grief can result in bad things. It's just saying that these are normal, natural emotions. Clinical depression, comparatively, requires you to meet a certain set of symptoms in a certain period of time. Now, this is distinct from just sadness, even though that's a part of it. Now, there are actually many types of depression, including seasonal affective disorder, which I referred to earlier. For this video, we're going to be focusing on major depressive disorder. Major depressive disorder is looking for a set of symptoms that last at least 2 weeks. And of those symptoms, you must have at least one of the following. Either depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day during this time, and this can either be seen by others or reported by you, or that we also need to see markedly diminished interest or pleasure in all or mostly all activities that you previously enjoyed. This is also called anhedonia, that you just no longer find something that you once enjoyed as fun. You have little motivation to engage in other activities. So one of those symptoms, either lack of interest or depression, is absolutely needed for major depressive disorder. The other symptoms include either a significant weight loss or weight gain within a recent period of time, insomnia or hypersomnia, agitation or lethargy, feelings of worthlessness, low self-esteem, excessive feelings of guilt, a diminished ability to concentrate or indecisiveness nearly every day, or the one that we're most familiar with, thoughts of suicide. If you noticed, many of the symptoms of depression can be exact opposites. For instance, hypersomnia is when an individual sleeps too much, whereas insomnia is a person who can't find the ability to sleep and thus becomes sleep deprived in that sense. How is it possible that both of these, despite being opposite, can be part of depression? Well, this just goes to the case of how mental illnesses can affect people differently. What depression is mainly looking for is a change in that individual's life, a marked change. With some people, their distress will make them more agitated. They'll have a harder time sleeping, they won't want to eat, and so these issues cause a person to be sleep deprived and have weight loss. Another person may shut down with depression. They may not care about hygiene. They may stop doing everything. They may start comfort eating instead. All their actions are slowed down and they sleep most of the day. Again, two wildly different presentations, but depression all the same, as long as it's accompanied by marked diminished interest in activities or a depressed mood most days. Keep in mind that the timing matters significantly. A person can have a depressed mood maybe a day or 2 or 3 out of the week. Sometimes people can feel sad for quite a bit of time. Grief can last months. In most cases, a major depressive episode must last at least 2 weeks, and that's a significant chunk of time to be sad. It's hard for an individual to report themselves because we often forget our own emotions. If we feel sad now, we can often feel like we were never happy in the past. However, if we feel happy, we can believe that, oh, I'll never be sad again. It's a tricky way that our mind screws us over, but it happens. There's another depressive disorder where depressive symptoms last almost the entirety of the year, but they're in a reduced state, and that's dysthymia or persistent depressive disorder, but we're not going to get into that today. Now we can finally get to the character in our game, who I'll call Wolf from here on out. Wolf begins his year 8 of school in typical fashion. He notices that depression is there, but it doesn't really cause a significant impact on his life. It's only till later in that year when we begin to see depression take its hold on Wolf. Mainly, we're seeing how it impacts his self-esteem and how he relates to others because of the messages that depression sends him. There's a section in the game where we see how this impacts him. We have the words, "You convinced me that my friend didn't need me and was better off without me." This kind of line of thought happens a lot with people with depression. It goes under that belief that you're a burden, that people don't want to be around you. And so what we see our character even do is distance himself from his friend as a way to save his friend, even though there was nothing going on between the two that would hint that that should happen. And again, when you have depression, your thought processes are not quite correct. You think in ways that are erroneous. But to you, because of how depression has affected you, it feels like the truth. It feels like no one does like you. And that's how depression can slowly weave its way into your everyday life and make you change more than you need to. Year 9 sees Wolf continuing to experience self-esteem issues. We read that he develops a close friendship with the new guy in school, and everything seems to be going well. There's even a point where Wolf is able to ignore the depression. However, a seemingly innocuous event causes Wolf to fall deeper into that depression. He walks by this new friend, he says hi, and this friend seems to ignore him. Wolf interprets this as if the other character was embarrassed by him, but in reality it most likely was that this other person didn't even hear or see Wolf at that time. However, at that point, Wolf says that his depression tells him that it was right all along. No one likes Wolf. Wolf did something bad supposedly, when none of this actually happened. And these thoughts get so bad to the point that Wolf has trouble sleeping. He wakes up in the middle of the night. See, there's that insomnia for you right there. Overall, we're kind of seeing two aspects of depression. We see the self-esteem issues. This relates to guilt, feeling like a burden, feeling low, hopeless. And we also see the insomnia. We got two symptoms. Another thing that we see in this episode is that the depression comes and goes. One part of major depressive disorder is you can have periods of times where you have no depression. You can have 2 weeks of depression and then feel fine for a while. But later on, it comes back. And that's what makes major depressive disorder recurrent. Some people only experience one episode in their lives. Other people feel multiple episodes over the course of their lifespan. As the scene continues, like I said though, Wolf develops an ability to ignore his depression, to control his emotions, that he's able to actually manage his depression, which is what we all want to be able to do. However, that's when his parents divorce. There are many aspects that can affect one's depression. There are genetic aspects, there are environmental aspects, and for the case of Wolf, his depression worsens because his parents divorce. And any major life event can cause an increase of mental illness. Even good changes like being promoted can cause one to experience additional distress. As we see for Wolf, that ability to control his depression is absolutely erased. He even stops reaching out to others to get help. He tells himself that he should isolate and not speak to anybody. On top of the sleep issues he now experiences, he has another symptom of depression, which is our lack of interest in preferred activities. He talks about playing video games and how it's no longer enjoyable. It feels more like a chore. When you can no longer resort to your hobbies to make you happy, then you have very little to cling on to develop that sense of hope, sense of happiness, or security. And that's why we see Wolf start to really spiral from here on out. Following the brief year 10, year 11 shows Wolf in an extremely depressed state. Everything now makes him angry. He's very irritable. He's not been sleeping. He doesn't like socializing anymore. He's closed himself off from the world. There's even points where he's talked about simple tasks are excruciatingly exhausting and that he doesn't want to do anything anymore. Now we find he has two additional symptoms, lethargy and fatigue. Combine that with everything he's already feeling, that's just a recipe for hopelessness. If you feel this way, how can you feel anything else? So he describes himself as numb. And these weird amalgamation of emotions can happen where a person feels angry, sad, and at the same time numb, as if they can't experience any emotions. Although that is not necessarily a symptom of major depressive disorder, it often goes hand in hand, that this is a low mood. It's not necessarily sad, but it's not necessarily happy either. Although the segment's only a few minutes long, we have to take in consideration this is one whole year for Wolf. And to experience that level of distress for that long inevitably leads to suicidal thoughts, which we see him grapple with extensively in year 12. Year 12 is where things get a little weird, and our character Wolf starts talking to what is the embodiment of depression, or what we think was depression, but ends up being something else. It's strange, and if I were to give one critique in this video is that I don't like the transition to abstract conversation that appears in Year 12. I much appreciated the very basic, straight to the point, realistic depiction of depression that this game provided. And so I wish it kind of had stuck with that. I'm not going to really give descriptions of Year 12. I'm going to let everyone else experience that themselves if they're so interested. Instead, I'm going to look at the full picture we have of Wolf. Based on everything we've seen so far, he fits the diagnosis of major depressive disorder. He's missing one or two symptoms, but for the most part, most therapists would look at him and say, yeah, you have depression. I have seen other reviewers criticize this game for presenting a textbook case of depression, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Many people who experience depression showed textbook depression. There's a reason we have diagnoses that have very common symptoms. You're not going to have a person that has depression and has psychosis at the same time, at least not in most cases. Most people with depression don't lead exciting lives, and that's what makes depression so hard, is there's nothing special about it. If anything, life is mundane. And to have a mundane life in depression is hard. It doesn't make for an interesting story, just a sad one. And that's why we find lots of people with depression looking towards suicide as an escape. So if I were to make any grand statement based on what we've talked about today is depression doesn't have to be unique in order to be awful. If you're feeling this way, then it's important for others to know how you're feeling. Don't be like Wolf, who isolated himself. If you needed that help, go search for it. I've included some links in the description of this video to organizations that can help you seek help. Now, I'm American, so I don't know many of the resources outside of my US-centric lifestyle. So you may have to go searching for yourself. Reach out to somebody if you can. And all this brings me to the final point of this video, and that is to determine yourself if you are experiencing something that needs help. Just like I started this video, we do not want to misinterpret sadness for depression. If you're sad, that's normal. It's okay. It's a normal experience of life. Depression is something that we need help on. How do you know if you have depression? Don't go looking it up on Google. That's not going to help you at all. When you start self-diagnosing, you sometimes stigmatize normal reactions. You may say, well, sometimes I don't like video games, so maybe I have depression. Don't do that. If you're really worried you have depression, go seek help. Just as you wouldn't use WebMD to confirm if you have cancer, don't look up an online version of the DSM to figure out if you have depression. Again, I have links below if you need to find something. Otherwise, go to your natural supports to also help you. I appreciate Polygonal Wolf for creating Drowning to give us a depiction of depression and an area for us to discuss depression. And if any of you have suggestions for other games that I can play, go ahead and give me a holler. Until then, well, bye.